All right, the assignment I mentioned is going to be a draft render. Well, I mean, the reality is it's going to be 3 draft renders. Really, it's the same one with 3 different settings. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just set up a sheet and basically just divide it into 3 equal spaces, and then drop your rendering onto it so that we can compare the same rendering just with 3 different types of settings. Okay, so it's just rapid prototyping a couple of different types of renders and settings that we might want to possibly use. So you guys, I think for the most part, all knew Photoshop enough, except for maybe a few of you. But when we set up our new file, we're going to do it like this. Just go to File, New. And generally speaking, I set things to inches, but we're going to do an 8.5 by 11. So the width is 11, the height is 8.5, because just about everything we do in architecture, unless you're doing skyscrapers, is predominantly going to be a landscape format. It's not always true, it's up to you. I'm just kidding. The pixels per inch, we'll talk more about this at resolution, but generally you don't want to go any lower than 150. Any lower than that is for web graphics, and that's not good enough for print. So go to 150, and that's that. Wow, that looks almost square on my screen. Anyway, some of you may be familiar with rulers. Some of you may not, or guides, right? This is how you set up a proper Photoshop file. So what I'd like you to do is set a few of those guides so that you can get them to be exactly in thirds across the sheet. And I'm not worried about, I'm only collecting a digital file for this one, so I'm not worried about, like a print margin or anything like that. So if you're curious about setting up guides, and this is just a refresher for anyone who might not quite remember, you'd want to open up rulers. It kind of is like your way of sizing things. And if you wanted to drop a guide, you click on the ruler and you drag a guide down, right? That's a guide. But the way I want you to set it up is a little bit more specific than that, because 11 inches divided by 3 is a really odd size to try and hit perfectly. So go to View and go to New Guide. And this asks you for inches, but the cool thing about it, and it doesn't really tell you this, and it took me like years to learn it, you can actually type in percentages. Wow. Yeah, it's pretty neat. So you can say like 33.33% and say OK, and that's 1/3 of the way across the sheet. And you could also go to a different, well, the downside is you kind of have to do your math. So I'm going to say 66.67. There. So that's thirds. So one thing I do want you to do with everything that we produce for this class is I want you to be very diligent about how you align things, and I want you to use guides. I want things to be evenly spaced, and I will probably tell you the margins or spacing that I want for most layouts until we get to sort of the end. But anyway, what I want for us here is I'm going to put a little bit of a text box on the bottom of each of these third sections. Okay, and that's because I want you to label what the specific difference is in that particular image versus the others. Okay, so we all pretty much have a default. And you'll put your default on the left, and then you'll change a setting for your second render, and you'll put that one in the middle, and you'll tell me what changed. And then you'll put your third one with a different setting that you modify again in the third side. So anyway, that's you can just drag a guide down and hold Shift, and it'll lock to an exact part, tick mark on the rule. So I'm just putting mine a 1/2 inch from the bottom. That'll be fine. And don't worry so much about alignment to the left. That's not as mission critical, but the text box tool is right here on the left. You can click that and just, it doesn't seem to want to load for me. There we go. Took forever. If you ever ask Iggy about me and text, he'll tell you that I am terrible at text, and it's probably true. I'm not a graphic designer, so I kind of stick to a few staple fonts. I use Arial a lot. I use Calibri, and I use like Myriad Pro like all the time. Those are my 3 texts that I always use. So I'm okay with you using funny text. Just don't use, funny text. Don't use funny text. Sorry. You can use a conceptually appropriate text that is not one of those 3. Just have a very good reason for using it, and don't use anything that's like a Comic Sans. That's about it. That's all my text rules I have for you. So Myriad Pro, I think I'm just going to stick with that. So this first one, I'm just going to set a title that says Bright Interior Standard, and I wish I could spell it right. So you can go up to this little grabber here, and you can just move the text down to the bottom, and it should align. So it should snap to the bottom of the text line, and that should be fine. Don't worry so much about the wording. It's if you have a particular way that you want to describe something, feel free to just describe it however you think is most appropriate. That's not the critical part of this assignment. I just want to be able to know what settings you changed. Okay, so this one is my standard. I'm going to set it to bright interior and just let it go. And the next one, I'll probably change like the color temperature or something like that. Okay, so, and then I'll write, color temperature plus 1000 or something like that. But anyway, let's jump back to our draft renders, and let's pick one to make it our default. And I think I'm going to pick this one because it's the most developed. This one is like really, really draft. I probably would want a little bit more, a little bit higher quality out of the renders that we produce for this. So I'm probably going to bump our time up to like 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Hopefully we'll be able to get that done in class today. Potentially not, but we'll see. But for this one, I'm just going to take this as if it was done a little bit longer. So the export process is fairly simple. You just go up here to the top left, and you can go to the little disc here. It almost looks like a record player. I think that is a record player. Oh no, it's the... It could be the HDD optical arm or something like that. I'm trying to tell if it's a record player or if it's just a hard drive. It's probably just a hard drive. I'm wishful thinking. Anyway, so click that, and you just save the file. So I'm just going to drop this in my dump folder, and I'm going to call this one Bright Interior Standard. Don't worry about BBP. I just generally bump it up to 16 when I save the files. It shouldn't affect you much here for these. They're just drafts. So when I go to drop this in, it's really as simple as just navigating to that file. It was in my dump folder, Bright Interior Standard. Drop it on, and we're good to go. Now, it is. Yeah. Okay. All right. So anyway, your image is just going to come in sort of scaled to the size of the canvas. You can drag that, and it will snap to the top and bottom. If you don't hold Shift, it's going to skew. So make sure you hold Shift, and it'll. Oh, it won't snap. It didn't snap. Oh, we need a guide for it to snap. Put a guide there. Put a guide there. And it's still not snapping. I forget how to make it snap. Anyway, that'll be good enough. Okay, so you'd want to hit enter, and then it'll accept the actual scale that you dropped it in at. Okay, so don't worry so much about the resolution or anything like that. The one thing I do want to make sure you do accommodate is the text. So when I dropped it in, it came in on a layer that was above the text. Just take the image and drop it to the background. Like that. So our text is going to pop up. It's not very readable, so I'm going to change the text to be white text. And if I'm losing you guys on Photoshop stuff, I can work with you a little bit more. But I didn't feel like I needed to introduce many of these concepts. If you guys need more help, I'll help you. But so anyway, that's dropping one image on. Okay, I don't really think that well, there's an easy way and there's a more professional way of cropping these things for what you need to do. But for a draft, it's okay to just like lop off the image. So what I would suggest you do is just grab a whole side. You're going to need to grab this little grabber here, that thing, and then you can just delete. It's going to ask you to rasterize it. There you go. Delete. Layer. Rasterize the layer, and then you can delete that side. Okay. Why did I do that? It's so that I can get one complete image, and then just put each sliver of that image next to one another so that it fits appropriately. And you can see like the same image with 3 different filters right next to it. So to give you a sense, let me go back a sec here. And I'm just going to simulate this real quick. What you're going to wind up with is an image that kind of looks like this. Oops. Okay, so you're going to see sort of, 3 drafts with 3 different settings of the same image on the sheet. Granted, I just Photoshopped mine with the color filter and stuff like that. I don't want you to do that. I want you to actually go into your rendering, change the setting, re-render it, come in and crop it and put it in place. Okay, I only did that so you could see what it will look like in the end. I cheated. Yeah. Okay, so what questions do you have?
Can we cheat?
No, you may not. You may not cheat. I want 3 separate renderings, and in fact, I'm going to ask you for your render files, your raw render files. Okay, so I'm not going to collect this until next class on Tuesday. So the things that you might want to consider is the assignment is actually asking for you to render an object in your space, which could or may not actually relate to your concept a little bit, or you could use it as a lighting element. You can put focus lights on it, up lights, down lights, whatever you want to do to try and study the way light is going to interact in this space with an object. So I would urge you to possibly use part of this time to produce that and maybe try a few things out. But ultimately, this is the product for Tuesday, and then after that, we're going to really kind of hone in on a little bit more about materiality, a little bit more about lighting, produce some more fine grain or higher resolution images, and yeah. Yes.
Do we get to pick the 3 different renders, or are you going to assign certain?
You get to pick. Yeah. I want you to guys. I want you to just set a standard on the left, like just pick one of the defaults, like bright interior or bright exterior or dark interior, and then go from there. Like and that doesn't mean that you can't change from bright interior to dark interior. You can make that change too. That's fine. But then you might. I think the ones you probably want to start messing with turbidity. You're not going to see much if you mess with like the environment settings, but you definitely can spend time, focusing on light, like your lens and camera settings.
Well, what about the time, like time of day, night?
Depending on how much aperture you have in your space, that would actually change quite a bit. So yeah, that's a very significant one. And if you set it to like a dusk sort of time, you're going to get like a more physically accurate sort of warmer light than you would in the middle of the day. So it'll change the color temperature of your image quite a bit. Okay. Other questions? Okay, so we're kind of moving into studio mode here. So if I lost anybody on the Photoshop stuff, I'll come around and help you out with that. Otherwise, get onto your draft renders. I'm going to say let's do our drafts at between 15 and 20 minutes. You're going to get a much finer grain image than this. This is not really acceptable at the level that it's on.